911, where is your emergency? My she's dead! She's been shot and there's blood everywhere! She's been shot!
With each new piece of evidence, the case became a media sensation, attracting widespread attention and the rapt attention of those who followed this horrific case closely. This is the heartbreaking story of a devoted single mother who was caught in a web of lies, deceit, and charm. The facade began to crack, revealing inconsistencies and disturbing details. Those who knew the truth watched with suspicion as he crafted his story, waiting for him to slip up. Doubts began to creep into her mind. Was the man she loved capable of something so heinous? Her curiosity got the better of her, driving her to dig deeper into his past. What she discovered was horrifying, a history of abuse and manipulation. Yet she was captivated by him, ignoring the warnings of those around her. It was only when he began to reveal his true nature, violent outbursts, threats, and moments of uncontrollable rage, that she began to fear for her own safety. Her love quickly turned to fear, and she knew she had to run. Durham is a city in the U.S. state of North Carolina with a population of 280,500. A quiet rental home became the scene of a terrible tragedy that shocked even the most experienced police officers and everyone around them. A young mother, Janet, was found dead in a pool of blood. At first glance, it appeared that she had been killed by gunshots, but the brutal reality turned out to be even scarier. Not only had Janet been robbed of her life, but also the life of her unborn child. This shocking event cast suspicion on the entire town, and detectives had no idea that the investigation of this brutal crime would drag on for years, gradually uncovering horrifying secrets. According to the testimonies of relatives and friends of the deceased, just a month before her death, Janet complained about problems with her spouse. According to her, her husband had serious mental problems. He too easily lost his temper and lost control. She repeatedly stated that she was afraid of him and was going to leave him. The victim's mother claimed that she had witnessed arguments between the couple on numerous occasions, but had never seen Raven use physical violence. When contacted by police officers, Raven admitted that they had had arguments on several occasions, but adamantly denied guilt. The deceased Janet was not just a victim of this horrific crime. She was a young mother, a loving wife, and a woman expecting another child. Her life, full of hopes and plans, was brutally cut short in an instant. But who could have committed such an atrocity? Raven, at first glance, seemed like the perfect husband and father. Young, charming, active in sports. So, what really happened that fateful night? Let's try to understand and place with you in this very complex and confusing case. Janet Abaroa lived with her husband and newborn son in North Carolina at the time of the massacre. She was 25 years old, but in her short life journey, she had managed to go through many difficulties. In recent years, the young woman had focused on building a solid family and being the best mother she could be to her child. Janet Abaroa was born on June 1979 in a small town in Virginia. Her family was very large. The girl became the 7th of 10 children. The family belonged to the Mormons, and religion from childhood took a prominent place in the life of each of them. From an early age, Janet was strong, independent, friendly, and possessed a sharp mind. She loved children very much and always dreamed of being a mother. Education was given to her without problems, and she had enough time for sports. In middle school, the girl played soccer, basketball, and swam. In high school and college, she played on local teams, particularly for the University of Southern Virginia. During one of her college matches in 1998, Janet met a young soccer player named Raven Abaroa. He played for the Southern Virginia men's soccer team. The young people instantly connected and fell in love. Despite her sociability and openness, the girl strictly adhered to the canons of her faith and kept her distance. The relationship lasted 2 years before the young man offered his beloved his hand and heart. During this period, the girl was 20 years old, and her chosen one was a year younger. They were married in August 2000 in the Mormon temple located in Washington, D.C. After the conclusion of the union, the newlyweds together began to build a family. The couple's first step was to find a job to gain financial independence. They took a job together as salesmen at a sporting goods store. However, for this, they had to move to the city of Durham, located in North Carolina. The young spouses began to rent a house in the suburbs and immediately began working. It seemed that the young people were happy in marriage. Outwardly, they were an ideal couple, as was told by all friends and neighbors. However, as often happens, much was done for show. Quite quickly, the young couple began to have problems. Janet repeatedly complained to her family and friends that Raven cheated on her with different women. He even once left home for a few days, but later returned. All this was given to Janet with great difficulty, as she dreamed of a large, strong family and children. The word fidelity was not an empty word for her. She was at a real crossroads because she sincerely loved her husband and did not want to break with him. Another difficulty was connected with the fact that sometime after the confession of adultery, Janet found out that she was pregnant. She dreamed of a large family, and it seemed that everything began to come true. But against the background of such behavior of the spouse, it was all weighing on her mind and frightening her. The young woman didn't want to be a single mother, but at the same time, she had no idea what to do about Raven's behavior. All of these circumstances added to the tension in the family. During her pregnancy, Janet became close to her neighbors and found several friends among them. She had company, and her new friends even approached her husband. They tried to convince him to stop cheating on his pregnant wife. Apparently, these words worked, as he promised to be a model husband. Despite the doubts, everything seemed to have normalized, especially after the birth of their son, who was named Caden. The boy came into the world on October 17, 2004, and completely attracted all the attention of his mother. She couldn't think about anything but being the perfect parent for her child. All this was happening against the backdrop of the financial crisis the young family was experiencing. They had money problems because the young mother was now not bringing in an income. The only breadwinner was Raven, but his salary as a salesman was disastrously insufficient for 3 people. The landlord of their house was understanding and gave them a 3-month grace period on their rent. He was sympathetic to the family because he realized that they were struggling financially and that a child would require even more investment in the beginning. However, despite the support, the young people could not solve all their financial problems, so they turned to the local church for financial assistance, and the congregation helped the young family. In December 2004, the situation became even worse. During this period, the son was only 2 months old, and then his father was arrested. He was arrested for stealing goods from the very sporting goods store where the young man worked with his wife. It turned out that he stole several tracksuits and managed to sell them on the internet. The total damage from his actions amounted to more than $10,000. Of course, the thief was fired. Janet could not bear the shame of her husband's behavior and quit her job as well. As luck would have it, Raven managed to avoid jail time. He was ordered to pay $15,000 in restitution to the store and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. In fact, both parents were left without a job and without money, with an infant in their arms. To get a normal job with a criminal record, Raven Abaroa could not. Despite serious difficulties, the young family struggled to stay afloat. They took on part-time jobs and accepted help from loved ones. Several months passed in such a state until fate dealt the young family the most crushing blow. On April 26, 2005, Janet picked up Caden from kindergarten. Together with her son, she went home to prepare for dinner. The husband arrived in the evening, had dinner with his family, and then, after his wife and child fell asleep, he headed to Morrisville to attend a local indoor soccer game. Returning home, the man realized that his house had become the site of a terribly horrible and bloody tragedy. Janet lay in an unnatural position on the floor, in a pool of her own blood, showing no signs of life. There were blood stains all over the house, as if a butcher had walked through the house. A small child lay in his crib nearby, crying. Fortunately, he was unhurt. Raven, in shock, immediately called 911 emergency services. He said his spouse had been attacked. She was covered in blood, but he couldn't understand what had been done to his wife. Raven assumed she had been shot.
911, we're doing emergency. My wife is dead. She's been shot and there's blood everywhere. Shot? Yes. Okay, you're going to have to calm down. How old is your wife? She's 25. I'm sending the paramedics to help you now. Stay on the line. I'll tell you exactly what to do.
When paramedics arrived on the call, they realized that Janet had not been shot but stabbed several times. The young mother died instantly from wounds to her neck. The scene of the massacre resembled a slaughterhouse, as the woman had lost a third of her blood. The entire room was drenched in blood. She died in her rented house, but it wasn't the scale of the bloody tragedy that was most striking. It was the fact that Janet was pregnant, and the baby in her belly was also dead. The police were stunned by the brutality of the crime, because the chilling picture was reminiscent of a horror movie. The police had to establish who could go to such cruel and drastic measures against a woman with a child. However, the detectives had no idea that the investigation would take almost a decade. After examining the crime scene, the body was taken to the medical examiner's lab. According to the autopsy report, the deceased suffered 3 deep stab wounds. One of them was located on her left arm and was clearly defensive. A 25-year-old woman was also fatally stabbed in the chest, but the fatal injury to her and her unborn child was a stab wound in the neck area. The attacker had severed an artery, which caused profuse bleeding. Janet Abaroa was losing blood so quickly that she was unconscious within seconds. Typically, with injuries like this, the victim dies within minutes. Given the relatively small number of blows inflicted, the medical examiner was unable to determine their order. Also, the expert found it difficult to give the exact time of death, as the body showed signs of decomposition, but the temperature in the room was quite low, which could have slowed down this process. At the scene of the crime and on the victim's body, there was plenty of evidence, which was collected by forensic experts, but all the materials needed to be thoroughly investigated. In parallel, the police were looking for witnesses who could point to the likely perpetrator. In the field of view of detectives immediately fell the husband of the deceased, Raven Abaroa, who was paid close attention. The young father of the family was repeatedly invited for questioning. On the basis of his testimony, they were able to restore part of the events that preceded the brutal deprivation of life of Janet Abaroa. According to him, on April 26, 2005, he returned home around 8 p.m. He then traveled to Morrisville to play in an indoor soccer game. Raven did not return home until 10:40 p.m. His spouse did not answer when he called out to her, so the man went to an upstairs room. Here, the head of the household saw his spouse kneeling in an unnatural pose. According to Raven, she periodically used this posture to relieve menstrual cramps. Janet was kneeling with her head on the floor, not moving or responding. Then Raven turned on the light and saw a terrible picture. The floor and walls were covered in blood. He turned his wife on her side and realized that she was dead. According to forensic experts, the specific position of the body could have caused the blood to flow simply by leaning forward through the stab wound until the fluid thickened. In fact, this could have continued for several hours. However, given the extent of the injuries and the severed artery, the woman could have been killed just minutes before Raven arrived. The police officers began to ask the man who he thought might have been behind the crime. Raven came up with an unexpected theory. In his opinion, the family had recently been in a lot of difficulties related to finances, and he assumed that, against this background, his wife simply could not stand it and took her own life. Raven said that sometime before her death, Janet began to behave strangely and often said that the situation was her fault, associated with Christian sins. The family and friends of the deceased took this as an absolute lie. They knew everything from Janet and were one of the few people with whom she talked calmly and shared her frustrations. However, she never voiced anything like that. Besides, the woman was very religious and would never do such a thing. By this point, however, detectives were already certain that she could not have voluntarily killed herself. The woman had sustained injuries impossible to inflict on herself. In addition, there was clearly evidence here to indicate that someone other than Janet and the baby had been in the house at the time of the massacre. A bloody shoe print was found next to the body, as well as a fingerprint. Neither the windows nor the doors were broken, which means that the victim voluntarily let the perpetrator into the house, or he entered it on his own. Either way, it was someone close to the victim who had access to the house. There were no signs of a struggle, except that one of the stab wounds was on the arm, which is typical of an attempt to close in from a blow. The attack was probably sudden, for the husband of the murdered woman claimed that Janet was already asleep before he left. Strangely, the only things missing from the house were Raven's laptop and 2 kitchen knives. One of them was probably used during the brutal and bloody murder. That said, the perpetrator had not touched any of the other valuables in the house and nothing had been tampered with. The young mother's valuables, including the rings, were still there, as were many expensive items that could have been sold on the black market. Since none of this looked like a robbery, therefore, the robbery theory was quickly discarded. At that time, there was still no evidence against the husband of the deceased, so he was simply released. However, detectives did not completely dismiss the husband's involvement and began to look closely at him. After what happened, Raven Abaroa began to behave even more suspiciously. Just a day later, he packed his bags, took his son, and left for Utah. At the same time, it could be quite natural, because to be in the house where the crime occurred, not every widower will be able to stay. Raven, at that moment, needed the support of loved ones, and it is logical that he went to the place where all his family lived. However, his siblings and the victim's friends he met with after the murder later admitted that Raven was not acting like a person who had lost a loved one. It was as if he was indifferent to what had happened to his spouse and not at all interested in who had done it. Raven was clearly not going to seek out the culprit and seek a just punishment. He did not participate in the distribution and drafting of reward notices or any other actions of the police and the loved ones of the deceased. The husband of the deceased simply left with the child and never again had any intention of coming back. Investigators noted that from the very beginning of the investigation, Raven was reluctant to cooperate and then simply ignored any requests. At the same time, the victim's family devoted every spare second to trying to solve this bloody crime. The first lead didn't last long. The police had a motive when they learned that after the second pregnancy, shortly before the crime, Raven had taken out a life insurance policy on Janet's life for the tidy sum of $600,000. The cops thought this was strange because the family had serious financial problems and had not previously taken out these policies. The money was not enough for the most important things, but Raven found money to pay the premiums. Plus, it turned out that the husband had applied to the insurance company for payment right after the attack, before the victim had even been buried. It all looked suspicious. In trying to figure out who Raven was, the police quickly concluded that from the beginning, his story of his relationship with Janet was surrounded by lies. During their acquaintance, he had told her that he was a devoted Mormon and had even taken a missionary trip to Peru. These were all lies but proved no direct connection to the crime. During this period, Raven was living in Salt Lake City, Utah. The young widower was leading a quiet life, receiving insurance benefits and raising his child. Here, the man met and immediately began dating a new woman named Vanessa Pond. Their romance quickly developed, as the new lover was an educator and worked in a kindergarten in which the young father enrolled his son. They saw each other often and quickly found a common language. Vanessa had also been a single mom for the past 5 years. She was desperate to find her love and was going to devote her life to her child alone. But Raven was different from other men. Because of his friendly nature, he was persistent and able to attract attention, turning Vanessa's head and surrounding her with lies. The man immediately wormed his way into her confidence and confessed to his new girlfriend that his spouse had died in a car accident. At this time, Raven had no idea that Janet's extended family was watching his every move. They thought his behavior looked more than suspicious. The victim's family and friends wanted to find out what he was going to do next and possibly get proof of his involvement in taking Janet's life. The victim's loved ones quickly learned that he was lying about his former lover's death to everyone around him, claiming that his spouse had been killed in an accident. At first, the new lover of the main suspect trusted him completely and was not interested in the details of Janet's fate. However, gradually, curiosity took over. Vanessa was easily able to find information that the former wife of the widower was the victim of an unsolved crime. She learned that Janet died from 3 stab wounds. However, even here, Raven managed to deceive the naive lover, complaining to her that the police and the public were obsessed with the idea of accusing him of the death of the mother of his child, but assured her that he had nothing to do with it. His wife was killed by a robber. Amazingly, it all worked, and his new lover believed him. Janet's family learned that the dead woman's husband had started a new relationship. They contacted his new girlfriend. They warned her that Raven could be dangerous and advised her to stay away from him. But the woman didn't believe them. She seemed to be completely enchanted by this man and had complete faith in him. After 3 years of their romance, Vanessa and Raven were finally married. What seemed like a true idyll at first eventually began to resemble Raven's first marriage. His new bride also witnessed his mood swings and frequent fits of rage when he lost control of himself. The woman began to fear for her life when he raised his hand to her. Sometimes he even threatened her with violence. Their marriage lasted only 4 months when their love came to a sudden end. Vanessa decided to part ways with Raven Abaroa. Since the pressure from the detectives did not stop, Raven decided to talk to the press. The man expressed hope that the police would finally solve the case and find the perpetrator and then get off his back, but at the same time, he completely denied his involvement in the crime. During this period, a new detective took over the case, who was determined to get a fair punishment for the murderer of the young mother. Janet's family actively helped the detectives and cooperated with the investigation. Amidst all this, Vanessa's anxiety was growing. She repeatedly replayed in her head the thought of whether her husband could have killed his first wife, and she began to have doubts about his honesty. It seemed to Vanessa that he was quite capable of such an atrocity. The woman spoke to the media afterward. Vanessa confirmed that her ex-husband often behaved inadequately. The longer they were in the relationship, the more she became convinced that he was quite violent and aggressive. Although Raven rarely used physical violence against her, he was constantly on edge. According to her, the worst episode in her relationship with him happened on Christmas 2008, during another scandal, which was provoked by the man himself. He locked Vanessa in the bathroom and said that he wanted to hit her, hated her, and didn't care even if she died. This was the turning point after which they broke up.
I've been a single mom for 5 years. I know what it takes to raise a child. I thought, maybe I'll give him a chance because, he could be a fantastic father, fantastic husband.
He might be.
I finally fell for the nice guy is what I thought.
Vanessa stated that she was very wary of Raven and was sure he would take it easy on her, as he probably did with his ex-spouse. The new detectives enthusiastically took up the investigation and had to reconstruct the chain of events that had led the young mother to her death. They were also certain that Raven Abaroa was behind the crime. The main problem was the widower's alibi. On the evening of the crime and at the approximate time of the attack on Janet Abaroa, he was at the stadium and played indoor soccer. He was seen by several people who testified. In addition, the boot print found did not match the shoes used by the prime suspect. It was determined that the bloody fingerprint on the door also did not belong to the widower. But something about his behavior was suspicious. The detectives then scrutinized the recording of the conversation with the emergency dispatcher that Raven had called. One of the major errors was thought to be that the man had called the stab wounds gunshot wounds, even though that was obvious at first glance. Of course, this was not enough for charges, as he was not an expert in forensics and could have confused the two, especially as he was in shock at the time. However, the police did not believe him, as the young man was very clever and cunning, probably trying to play dumb to confuse the investigation. The new detectives called Raven to chat on the phone and ask him some questions. The widower repeated his story, but as before, could not recall many details. This increased suspicion, especially when he accused the police of incompetence. According to Raven, several knives were missing from his house on the evening of the attack, one of which he himself found later during a move. The man said that the police did not find it because they were working inattentively, and against this background, he doubts whether they were even able to find the perpetrator. At the same time, the detectives were sure that they could not have missed anything. The forensic officers had spent too long and too closely examining the crime scene. Unfortunately, in the years that the unsuccessful investigation lasted, the new detectives were no longer able to reconstruct the original picture of the crime. Investigators contacted Raven's other girlfriends, and they all confirmed that he was very aggressive and violent, which was the reason for the breakup of the relationship. Detectives also learned that before leaving the house on the evening of the attack, Raven had locked his dog in the garage, although he had never done so before. The man could not explain his action, but police believed that it made sense. Raven feared that the dog could defend his wife and prevent him from committing the crime, as well as attract attention to the house with his barking. Investigators also discovered that the day before the crime, the suspect had transferred information from his laptop to another medium. All this looked like preparation for the crime because the laptop was allegedly stolen. Based on a combination of new circumstantial evidence, on February 1, 2010, the young father was arrested on suspicion of first-degree murder and extradited to North Carolina. However, the material against the suspect was insufficient, all of it circumstantial, so investigators continued to gather evidence for trial. They scrutinized photos of the crime scene and the victim's body as police officers arrived at the house. The new detective noticed that there was an open, empty lens case lying on the table near the bed. This meant that the lenses could have been on Janet at the time of the crime. However, the parents of the deceased claimed that she never went to bed wearing them. Janet always took them off before going to bed, but Raven told the police that when he left for the football match, his wife was already in bed and sleeping with the baby, which means she had to take off the lenses. Could this indicate that she was killed before she went to bed and before Raven Abaroa left for the stadium? Unfortunately, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy did not pay attention to whether the victim had contact lenses on her eyes. This wasn't done on purpose. Often, forensic scientists overlook certain little things because they don't play a role in investigations. However, in this situation, they may have been key evidence of Raven Abaroa lies. To confirm or deny this speculation, an exhumation of the body was necessary. Janet's family was readily in favor of this, as they desperately wanted to prove the perpetrator's guilt and get justice for the deceased. In July 2010, the body was exhumed, and forensic experts did indeed find what looked like the remains of contact lenses on her eyes. After the forensic examination, it was possible to prove this fact despite the material drying out and deforming. But official expertise was needed to convince the jury. For this purpose, a large-scale experiment was carried out, which took a whole year. Specialists used pig's eyes on which they installed contact lenses. Then they underwent an embalming procedure identical to that through which human bodies go before burial. As a result of the experiment, it was possible to obtain confirmation of all the conjectures. At the time of the murder, Janet was indeed in contact lenses, which confirmed her intention not to go to bed. All this confirmed the lies of the prime suspect. Raven Abaroa trial began in 2013. The case caused a wide public outcry and was actively covered by the media. It attracted the attention of dozens of people who wanted to be present in the courtroom. The jury was provided with exhaustive information about what had happened. The prosecutor's office stated before the start of the trial that they believed the husband of the murdered woman was guaranteed guilty of the crime. However, they had no direct evidence against the defendant, so the case was built on circumstantial evidence, which was to the advantage of Raven's defense. At the same time, the amount of material was so large that it was clearly meant to convince the jury of his guilt. The investigation uncovered another blatant lie on the part of the defendant. Raven stuck to his story that he found his spouse already dead when he talked to police officers. However, in a confession at a local church, the man admitted that when he found his spouse, she was still alive and even tried to talk to him, but immediately collapsed and died. Detectives also had suspicions that the crime victim was having a relationship with another man on the side. She was about to leave her husband and had been communicating with her ex-boyfriend, named Scott, for some time. However, the nature of their correspondence indicated that they had just started communicating, and there was no intimacy between them. During opening statements at the trial, The defense emphasized to the jury that investigators initially focused all their attention on the evidence against Raven Abaroa. Police did not pursue other possible suspects and ignored several pieces of evidence. First, a fingerprint found on a closet did not belong to either the victim or her husband, Raven Abaroa. Second, a bloodstain found on the front door did not match either person's DNA. A third important piece of evidence that was overlooked was a shoe print left by the suspect when he stepped in the victim's blood. It was located near the body. The prosecution based its tactics on the fact that the victim's husband was manipulative, aggressive, and suffered from mood swings. One of the victim's friends said she suspected he had a mental disorder. One of the girls who was Raven's lover revealed that he was quite meticulous and calculating, using several phone numbers to contact girls on the side. This could indicate that he carefully planned the murder and could indeed successfully mislead the police. The same girl later admitted that Raven once forced her to have sex with her in a car literally on the side of the road. He behaved quite aggressively, so the lover had to comply. She even left a lock of her hair in the car in case something happened to her. All this had to have a good reason. Not every girl goes on a date and deliberately leaves samples of her DNA in a guy's car so that these traces can be used to prove his involvement in something bad. She was clearly afraid for her life, which she told the jury. One of the possible motives for the crime, according to the prosecutor, was Janet's unplanned pregnancy. She told only the closest people about it, including several of her sisters. Janet was so happy to be a mother, but clearly did not think her husband was the best father for her children. The news, given their dire financial situation, led the prosecution to suggest that Raven Abaroa might have been upset by the news of the impending addition to the family. Due to the new revelations, the defense filed a motion to cancel the trial because the characters of the victim and the defendant were not fully reflected. That motion was granted, and the next phase of the trial was set for March 2014. By this point, Raven had struck a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of his wife.
I wish that I could address some of the things that Chris Jansen's and Ms. Dowd have said, but I don't think this is the appropriate time or place for that. So I would just like to state that I didn't receive a fair trial the first time. I don't think I'll receive a fair trial the second time. And the fact is, I love my family very much. And I don't think it's worth risking the possibility of spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. I take this plea to ensure that that doesn't happen. And that's the only reason I did not kill my wife.
On that basis, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison with parole eligibility after 8 years. The 4 years he had already spent in prison awaiting sentencing were counted. Raven Abaroa was released from prison on Christmas Day, 2017. It began as an ordinary evening of laughter and the clink of glasses, but darkness crept in, bringing with it sinister developments. What seemed like an ordinary night quickly degenerated into a scene of violence, shock, and despair, fueled by carefully concealed malice. As the clock ticked past midnight, the whispers of the party gave way to a chilling silence. When the police arrived, they were confronted with a scene of unimaginable destruction and a growing sense of incomprehension. Amid the smoke and ruins, a young woman's life had been brutally taken, and the ensuing fire was no accident, but a deliberate attempt to erase the evidence. The discovery of bloodstains and bloodied clothing suggested a terrible struggle for life. As events unfolded, horrifying details began to emerge. Was the woman's death the result of a ruthless arson attack to cover up the crime? Or was a more sinister and cold personality behind it? The investigation, which began as a routine fire case, soon turned into a complex and dark detective quest. Suspicion began to fall on several people, each with their own secret. With each new piece of evidence and each new interrogation, the horror surrounding the crime thickened, and despite the best efforts of the police, the investigation only deepened the mystery shrouding this tragedy. The worst thing for everyone was the assumption that this looked like the actions of a psychopath. The police examined the campus CCTV footage, but it was of no help. The neighborhood was searched for a red Nissan car with a fraternity sticker spotted near the crime scene. Police interviewed all witnesses, especially fraternity members and other residents of nearby houses. The officers were later approached by two guys named Nicholas and Moore. They reported a theft. The guys said that their laptop and speakers had been stolen, and one of them also claimed to be missing the keys to a red-colored Nissan car. Suspiciously, all of this happened on the same night that a young girl died. Furthermore, the burglarized apartment was located literally across the street from the campus room that was set on fire. To understand how the events of that night unfolded, police had to delve into the secrets that remained hidden under a veil of fear and cruelty. Every testimony, every piece of evidence, could be the key to unlocking the truth. Chicago is the most populous city in the U.S. state of Illinois and the Midwestern United States. With a population of about 3 million, it is the third most populous city in the United States after New York and Los Angeles. Andrea DelVesco was born in this city in 1994. For her parents, Arthur and Leslie, the girl became the middle child. By the time of her birth, her older brother James was 2 years old, and a younger sister named Alexis came 4 years after Andrea's birth. It was a happy, loving family that moved several times, and eventually, they decided to settle in Austin, Texas. Andrea's mother studied finance and marketing at Southern Methodist University. After that, she got a job with American Airlines, then worked as an account manager in the residential mortgage department of Citibank. After the family grew, the woman quit her job to become a homemaker. Andrea's father, Arthur, managed the family's assets and was the owner of a holding investment company. Thanks to his activities, the family was quite wealthy and could afford a comfortable life. The family's fortune made it possible to send all the children to university. Before that, they were educated in a private school with a complex academic program, which was taught by the best teachers in the state. From an early age, the children broadened their horizons, covering everything from sports to religion, which helped instill high moral values in the youngsters. Andrea was good at school, played sports, and developed her all-around skills. The girl liked to go to museums and learn about art. At the same time, she was kind and sympathetic, sometimes even too much so, literally living in the problems of her immediate environment. A particularly close bond was formed with her mother, who did everything to provide home comfort. The girl and her family traveled a lot from an early age, which further broadened her horizons and allowed her to get acquainted with different new people and cultures. Having grown up, Andrea became a real pride and hope for her parents. Her younger sister looked up to her. Even her brother spoke proudly of her. In 2012, after graduating from high school, she applied to several educational institutions at once. The girl's parents hoped that she would enter the University of Chicago, where her older brother was already studying, and Andrea, for a while, really favored him. However, the girl decided not to hurry with the choice of an educational institution and waited until all the approved applications came to her. After that, from the list, she chose the Department of Psychology at the University of California, Los Angeles. This university was ranked among the best in America. However, studying in this educational institution required moving to the City of Dreams, Los Angeles. Her parents were glad that their daughter chose this direction and supported her choice, but they were worried about how their daughter would be so far away without them, all alone. Her brother would no longer be able to look after her. With the support of her family, she set out on her new life. Los Angeles, often referred to by its initials LA, is the most populous city in the U.S. state of California. With approximately 4 million residents within the city limits, it is the second most populous city in the United States, behind only New York City. When she arrived in Los Angeles, Andrea had to choose one of the clubs she was going to join, a fraternity and sorority. Student communities are known to be very friendly. There are entire neighborhoods on college campuses where large-scale parties are thrown that span several houses each. Many students here live so openly that they literally don't lock their house doors, so they can freely visit each other. It's safe enough here, but even in such places, various incidents sometimes occur. Andrea willingly participated in one of these communities. She had a terrific sense of humor, a pleasant appearance, and dressed beautifully. The girl's impeccable sense of style allowed her to become popular. In addition, she herself sewed various extravagant outfits, which time after time amazed the public. Andrea came up with unusual bright images, each of which invariably made her the queen of any party, where all the attention was drawn to her. The girl studied well, and after finishing her first year, found herself a job. The student became an assistant attorney at a law firm in Brentwood, where she dealt with administrative issues. However, this job did not suit her because of her busy schedule, so she had to find a new part-time job. She later changed several other jobs that would allow her to combine school and work. This allowed her to have her own pocket money and not depend on her parents. Andrea always dreamed of traveling after completing her education. Before that, there was not much left to finish the last course. During this period, she lived in one of the campus dormitory buildings located just 5 minutes from the main building of the educational institution. In September, the girl was preparing to start the final stage of her university studies. The beginning of classes was scheduled for September 24. Officially, the fall semester started on the 21. On September 19, the girl posted on her social media page one of her favorite music videos. She hardly realized at that moment that she was making the last publication of her life. Just the next day, September 20, 2015, was the last weekend before school started. The girls in the community were having fun on the balconies of the apartment complex. With her friend Jessica, Andrea took care of sorority organizational matters until 3 in the morning. Jessica then retired to her bedroom around 3:30 a.m. and went to bed, while Andrea made herself comfortable in the living room on the couch. However, this was her last night. A few hours later, another neighbor, Samantha, ran up to her door screaming about a fire. Andrea's door appeared to be closed, which was uncharacteristic of the girl. She always left her bedroom open to the rest of her friends. It was the norm in the sorority. Samantha couldn't open the door and called out to the other girls. Together, they all struggled to open the door, but the whole room was engulfed in smoke and fire, so they couldn't get in. They saw Andrea lying motionless on the bed, but they could not get through to her. It was very dangerous to stay there, so the students decided to evacuate the building. All the girls went outside, called emergency services, and reported the fire. The friends stood on the sidewalk and waited for help. When fire trucks arrived on the scene at 7:15, firefighters worked quickly and tackled the fire by raising fire hoses to the second floor. Andrea's room had a very heavy fire that took only 10 minutes to ignite. As a result, only 32 firefighters were able to deal with it, working promptly. After this event, information began to spread among students that Andrea DelVesco had died in the fire because she never left the burning building, and no one saw her. Firefighters who were finally able to enter the building found human remains on her bed. While investigating the circumstances of the accident, they concluded that the fire started spreading from the girl's bedroom. The body was badly burned, and it was impossible to identify it. In order to say for sure that it was Andrea who had died, the police officers could not identify the deceased immediately on the scene. Her face was unrecognizably disfigured by the fire. The only thing that was clear was that it was a female body. The police did not even have a chance to take fingerprints because the hands were too badly burned. Surprisingly, the girl's small dog was alive at that point. When the firefighters tackled the blaze, the charred animal, which was barely clinging to life, was lying at the feet of presumably her owner. However, it was later decided to put the dog to sleep to end its agony. All the students of the hostel were relocated to other houses. Meanwhile, renovations began in the charred building. The girls were frightened, so the university increased campus security. All students were already sure that it was Andrea who had died in the fire. All the others were discovered during roll call, so no one had any doubts about the identity of the deceased. Her roommates also claimed to have seen Andrea lying on a bed in the room engulfed in flames and didn't understand why she didn't get up and walk away from the fire. Thinking it was strange, they believed she may have lost consciousness at that point, suffocated from carbon monoxide, or may even have been already dead. At this time, the girls' parents had returned to Austin from a long trip. They did not suspect what had happened to their daughter in their absence, but they had already begun to worry as she had not been in touch. It was not possible to reach Andrea on the phone, so her mother contacted one of her neighbors. At that moment, the woman learned about the fire and that Andrea could have been the victim. However, the police at that time could not yet confirm the identity of the body found, and she was believed to be Jane Doe. Praying for her daughter's salvation, the entire family packed up and traveled to Los Angeles. However, law enforcement officials took over the case to verify all the circumstances. The police found out that Jessica, Andrea's neighbor, turned out to be the last person who communicated with her shortly before the tragedy. Investigators decided to talk to the neighbor to find out all the information about their last conversation. Jessica may have seen something. Detectives spoke with her to find out how the fire could have started, but the neighbor did not meet their expectations. She immediately claimed she didn't see anything and didn't know how it started, so her testimony was useless. The friends from the sisterhood, with whom the investigators also spoke, believed that Andrea could have fallen asleep leaving a scented candle lit, and it was an accident. None of them believed that the fire could have been started by someone intentionally. After all, Andrea had no enemies or ill-wishers. To confirm this version, it was necessary to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the scene. First of all, electrical appliances and sockets were checked for short circuits. However, everything was in order. No candles could be found. The only thing that looked strange was the trash can, which was located at the headboard of the bed. It seemed to the experienced firefighters that this was where the fire had started. It looked suspicious. Questioning her sorority friends, it turned out that the girl never slept next to the trash can. It always stood at the other end of her room and couldn't just move. However, it was impossible to identify the contents of the bucket without a thorough chemical analysis, as everything had been completely destroyed. Forensic scientists specializing in arson were called to the scene 2 hours after the fire had been extinguished. Police officers at that point were already confident that the fire was not an accident. The key object was a metal garbage can, which could have been filled with a flammable liquid and set on fire. For example, it began to burn at the headboard of the girl's bed. Then the flames spread to the ceiling and walls. Forensics confirmed their assumptions. When it became apparent that it was deliberate arson, the investigation became more intense. At the crime scene, forensic investigators found a large amount of blood evidence. The spatter was on and around the bed. Most of the stains had survived the fire. Given that the roommates called out to the girl when they opened her room at the start of the fire, investigators were alarmed that she did not respond and lay motionless. They believed she was already dead, and then the perpetrator set the crime scene on fire to hide all evidence. The police have reconstructed an approximate chronology of events that fateful evening. They interviewed many students, primarily the neighbors of the deceased. The last time Andrea was seen alive was at 5:50 a.m., when roommate Samantha was getting ready for work on campus and noticed her friend sleeping soundly on the living room couch. She then left for work and returned around 6:30 a.m., but Andrea was no longer on the couch. She had moved to her room, though this time her room door was closed, which was atypical for a girl. While talking to other female students who lived in the dormitory, the police got their first important lead. A girl named Sarah returned to her room around 5:30 a.m. after walking her boyfriend to the airport. Her dorm was directly above Andrea's room. It was still dark at this time, but when she tried to open the front door, she noticed a male silhouette. This was the women's quarters, although there were sometimes guys here to visit their girlfriends, so the presence of a guy didn't surprise her. But what alerted her was that the stranger immediately ran away as soon as the girl turned around, as if he was hiding from her. All this frightened her and confused her. According to the witness's description, the stranger was wearing a black baseball cap, a black and white t-shirt, and dark jeans. The girl was so frightened that she ran into her room and locked herself in it. As soon as she got inside, she immediately texted her boyfriend and told him that she saw some suspicious type. However, Sarah wasn't sure if he was dangerous or if she should have called the police. Besides, her boyfriend calmed her down by saying that it was probably someone else's boyfriend and everything was fine, so the student decided not to panic. Sarah went to bed, but around 6:15 a.m., she woke up to a woman screaming and a dog barking loudly and literally going crazy. These sounds were coming from the room below her, where Andrea lived. It really scared her, even though the dog had never barked before and had always behaved calmly. She realized that something bad was going on downstairs. The girl tried to contact Andrea to find out what happened, but her friend did not answer the phone. So Sarah turned to the emergency service, but they were distrustful of her words because it was a student campus where there were often parties, fun, alcohol, and loud noises, and nothing criminal had happened there before.
Just a couple minutes ago, I heard someone screaming in my complex. She's still screaming.
Nevertheless, a patrol car was dispatched to the address. The police officers arrived at the dormitory to check in around 6:23 a.m., but left within minutes without even telling Sarah what had happened. They just didn't see anything suspicious. There was no guy, the dog wasn't barking anymore, and no screams were heard either. The cops only directed flashlights from the street to Andrea's room without really looking or checking anything. They decided that someone had had too much to drink, had a fight, and the dog might have behaved aggressively because of that. Sarah, meanwhile, was looking out of her window. She called her downstairs neighbor several times, trying to reach her, but all in vain. Sarah also tried to call the other girls living in the house, but apparently everyone was asleep, and no one picked up the phone. Sometime after the police left, she heard a pop at about 6:45 a.m. The girl ran out onto the balcony and looked down. There was thick smoke coming from there. The girl also noticed that the same stranger in a black and white t-shirt whom she had previously met on the stairs had jumped down from her downstairs neighbor's balcony. She couldn't believe her eyes, and it scared her a lot. Sarah was afraid the guy had done something to Andrea. She grabbed her phone and started calling emergency services, explaining the situation, and went downstairs where other female students were already gathered outside Andrea's room, trying to open the door. Sarah didn't wait there and went outside, trying to track down the intruder. She saw him and chased the guy, literally chasing him down the street, but he was able to escape and got into a red Nissan car which he drove away in. Sarah remembered another important detail. There was a sticker on the back window from one of the fraternities at the college university. Meanwhile, the sorority friends had broken down the door to Andrea's room. The girls tried to shout to her, but she didn't respond. The students were ready to swear that they saw her lying motionless on the bed in the room engulfed in flames. Also, some of the girls noticed that there was blood on her neck, chest, and shoulder. However, none of Andrea's neighbors knew who might have wanted to harm their friend. Everyone loved her. She was not in a romantic relationship with any boyfriend at the time of her death. Detectives began to look into a robbery. However, nothing was taken from the deceased's room. They also worked on the version that Andrea could have met someone on Tinder, and the date was unsuccessful. The offended guy could hold a grudge and kill her. But that didn't check out either. There were no leads. The official conclusion that the charred remains belonged to 21-year-old Andrea DelVesco appeared only a few days after the fire. This was made possible by dental records that were requested from DelVesco's family. On September 22, an autopsy was conducted on the body of the deceased. The girl was wearing only a sports top, not even underwear. Therefore, experts had suspicions of rape. But this information could not be confirmed or denied due to the poor condition of the body. Most of the hair had been burned off, but there was a lot of blood on the surviving parts, especially on the back of the head. About 90% of the body was burned. But the most shocking thing was that forensic experts found several stab wounds, mostly to the head and neck area, which turned out to be fatal. 5 wounds were identified on the right side of the neck and 2 more on the left side. A total of 19 stab wounds were found on the deceased's body. One of them punctured the carotid artery, resulting in a rapid death from blood loss. The second stabbing, which also punctured the carotid artery on the left side, could have been fatal. Confirming that the girl died from the stab wounds was the absence of soot and carbon monoxide in her system. She was either already dead when the fire started, or it was almost immediately after the fire broke out. Obviously, the fire was not the cause of her death, but was a way to cover up the evidence of the crime. By this point, the investigation had already been reclassified as a murder case. A sense of fear and shock spread throughout the campus. On the day the official forensic report was released, police officers were able to track down the location of the stolen laptop and speakers, reported stolen by other students. Surprisingly, they were openly used by a guy named Joseph, who was located in Fresno, California. The distance between this location and the crime scene was more than 3 hours by car. The police immediately left for the address. Upon arrival at the address, it turned out that there were actually 2 Josephs living there at the same time, Marcaria and Garcia. The second Joseph seemed quite restless, which is why suspicions arose. The man claimed that he had not broken any laws and that he had taken the speakers from his neighbors. As the stolen goods were passed from hand to hand, the situation became more and more confusing. All of this led police to Albert Medina, a 22-year-old student who had loaned the items to Joseph. Albert said that his friends were moving, so they gave him the items for safekeeping. However, Albert himself was missing, and it was not possible to interview him. This could have been suspicious, but Albert had no previous criminal record. He was an ordinary student studying sociology and psychology at the university. His friends characterized him as a good guy. The police began their search a day later on September 24, but they managed to track down the likely culprit only on the 26th. He was arrested and immediately brought to the station for questioning. Albert began to remember his testimony incorrectly. According to him, he went to the University of California on September 18 and spent the whole weekend with his friend Eric Marquez. They attended a Chris Brown concert and had a good time. In the end, the guys came to a friend's party, and at that moment his speakers and laptop disappeared. The student eventually confessed under pressure from investigators that he was the one who stole things from these casual acquaintances because he was drunk and did not understand what he was doing. They returned home at about 5:30 a.m. But when investigators asked him if he had seen a suspicious stranger, Albert told something unexpected. According to him, when they were returning home with the stolen gadgets, they were attacked by a stranger with a gun. But they were able to break free, so the perpetrator did not shoot them, and they managed to escape. Albert's description of the attacker was that he was wearing dark jeans and a black and white t-shirt. This description of the intruder was very similar to the guy Sarah was talking about, but detectives questioned the credibility of his statement. During the interrogation, Albert suddenly remembered that his friend Eric had stopped by to visit a blonde-haired, beautiful girl he had met at a party that weekend. Eric was crazy about her. Her description, and even her name, matched Andrea. Eric had come to visit her for a reason, but for the purpose of intimacy. Albert himself was not with him in the girl's apartment and could not tell him what was going on there. When Eric returned, he was acting strange, nervous, and said that something had gone wrong. He admitted to hitting her and asked Albert to leave soon. He had plastic bags on his arms, which he then threw into a trash can, and a red plaid around his neck, which he then made Albert carry. Albert's testimony directly implied Eric's involvement in taking the girl's life and setting the house on fire. 5 days after the crime, police met with a new defendant in the case named Eric Marquez. He was also 22 years old and a fifth-year medical student at the university. Eric also had no problems with the law and was considered a good guy. His own friend, Albert, sent investigators to his home, which was only a 5-minute walk from the crime scene. However, it was not possible to get a confession from Eric. He claimed that he had been drinking alcohol all weekend and had hardly left the house. The investigators were sure that he was lying, and that's why he made up such a ridiculous story about drinking. To verify Albert's and Eric's testimony, surveillance cameras from the boys' home helped. Having checked the CCTV footage, it turned out that Albert's words were more likely to be true. The guys were awake from 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. and had been walking down the street and up to the apartment several times. Albert was just wearing a black and white t-shirt and dark jeans. Police discovered that at 4 a.m., Albert and Eric had left the house for a long time. It wasn't difficult to identify Albert by his conspicuous tattoo on his arm, but the key moment was when he returned to the apartment around 7:11 a.m. Albert had returned with his buddy and had a red plaid blanket thrown around his neck that belonged to Andrea DelVesco. The walk to Eric's house was about 5 minutes, which was consistent with the time of the arson. Also captured on the video was a red Nissan automobile that exactly matched Sarah's description. Then, at 7:30, Albert and Eric left the house to take out the trash. Albert was without a t-shirt, and Eric had changed clothes. The cameras captured this moment. Despite all this information from the police, Eric stubbornly denied and continued to claim that he did not remember anything. He did not remember his friend Albert breaking into the dorm and taking the blanket, although they walked together. But when the police received a search warrant for both of these bad guys' apartments and a thorough examination of their hands, the police arrested Albert because they found abrasions and scratches on him, which often appear during a fight, while nothing of the sort was found on Eric's body. Therefore, the investigators came to the conclusion that Albert was the one who broke into Andrea's room and brutally murdered her. The red Nissan used by the likely perpetrators was also found and towed away. In the car, they found bloodstains of the murdered person on the steering wheel, dashboard, and driver's door, as well as a lot of trash and one black sock. In the closet of the boys' apartment, police found a garbage bag with bloody clothes, Andrea DelVesco's underwear, and a black sock that matched the sock from the car. Police also found a bloody knife and a blanket from the victim's room. After all the checks, police had enough evidence to file charges. On September 28, both students were formally charged with murder and burglary. Albert was also charged with arson. The young man faced the death penalty. However, the detainees did not plead guilty. Their families demanded an honest, independent investigation because they did not believe they were guilty. However, all the evidence was against them. Now, it was up to the police to find out which of the arrested men was responsible for taking Andrea's life. The police managed to talk to Joseph Garcia, who was found in possession of a laptop and speakers. He revealed that he saw the boys return home that night. Albert shared with him what really happened in the dormitory. Albert broke into Andrea's room, who he really liked. He had previously seen her on a walk with her dog, so he targeted her. After sneaking into the hostel, Albert grabbed a knife from the girl's kitchen, dragged Andrea into the room, closed the door, and raped her, threatening her with the knife. She screamed and fought back desperately, so he had to silence her for good. He killed her and set a fire to cover his tracks, with Albert thinking he committed the perfect crime because he destroyed all the evidence and was proud of himself. Experts were able to identify traces of DNA. All the bloodstains on the clothes and in the car of the attackers matched the DNA samples of Andrea and the defendants. Later, another witness was found, a janitor named Julio, who cleaned the street near the dormitory. He saw a guy with a large tattoo on his arm, wearing a black and white t-shirt, get out of a red car at night and head toward the dormitory where Andrea lived. In the car, there was another guy sitting in the front passenger seat. Both guys looked drunk, were on their merry way, and laughing. The guy with the tattoo looked aggressive and started demanding Julio's help to get into the building, but he refused to get involved and walked away. Julio saw Albert climbing the stairs to the building, but thought the guy just lived there and couldn't get into the apartment because of the late hour, so he didn't pay much attention to it. Investigators concluded that Albert snuck into the building, and Eric was sitting in the car. Blood found in the driver's side of the car also indicated this. The family of the deceased was shocked that the police officers called by Sarah were so negligent in their work. The patrolman did not even knock on the girl's room, even though presumably the perpetrator was in the room at that moment and killing her. The girl could still have been saved. An internal police investigation was conducted. In response, the Los Angeles Police Department stated that the officers had been suspended. The negligence shown by the officers who were called by the victim's neighbor was tried in court. However, the law enforcement officers were acquitted, although they were fired. By the fall of 2016, Eric was tried for aiding and abetting a crime. Albert was charged with murder, robbery, and arson. Both were also tied to articles for burglary as well as animal cruelty, as the victim's dog was injured in the fire. By September 2017, the death penalty was still being considered for Albert. His attorneys pushed for a plea bargain so the student would receive a less severe sentence and avoid capital punishment, but he refused to agree. The case was split into 2 trials. As a result of the sentencing hearing, Eric received only 2 years and 10 months after pleading guilty to aiding and abetting. It was proven that he himself was not involved in the crime or arson, but was sitting in the car the entire time. On May 15, 2018, the trial of the main defendant in this case, Albert, began. He went before the jury on charges of 5 different offenses. There was no doubt about his guilt, because there was a lot of evidence against him, and this evidence was convincing. Despite this, Albert did not take a plea deal with the prosecution. On May 24, 2018, after a thorough review of the case, a decision was made. It was found that Albert committed arson, animal cruelty, burglary, and first-degree murder. The court ruled against the execution of the criminal and instead sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court also added an additional 14 years for other past crimes. The story began with a woman whose disappearance caused widespread anxiety and fear. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation became more and more complex, seemingly impossible to solve, and clues were lost in obscurity. After a long time, the gruesome discovery of the victim's body along with fragments of her costume scattered in different places horrified the police. The forensic examination painted a dark and chilling picture, confirming the brutality of the crime. The body showed signs of extreme violence. The face and jaw were broken beyond recognition. The story of the victim's last moments was analyzed, revealing the depth of the criminal's cruelty. This complex case, woven from threads of violence, deceit, and ultimately, left an indelible mark on the community and the hearts of those who walked his painful path to justice. In the small town of Monroe, the largest city and the county seat of Monroe County, Michigan, USA, population 21,000, where life was peaceful and quiet, the silence was shattered by the horrific news that the remains of a young girl had been found in the woods. Amid the fog and darkness, Chelsea Brooke, whose disappearance at a Halloween party had shocked the entire area, was found dead. The poison ivy costume she had worn that fateful night became an ominous symbol of her harsh fate. The police officers faced a complex and frightening case. Every trace found, every new testimony, pointed to the cruelty and cold calculation of the criminal. False testimony, deceit, and contradictory evidence entangled the investigation like a web in which more and more people were caught. At the heart of these events was Daniel Clay, whose name surfaced among the shadows of the past. His arrest should have put an end to the case, but instead opened a new chapter of the nightmare. Conflicting testimony, brutal details, and unclear motives turned the investigation into a nightmarish maze from which there seemed to be no way out. Monroe, a town where everyone knew each other, now lived in fear. Who could have committed such an atrocity? Which neighbor, acquaintance, or friend was the monster in disguise? On the 22nd of July, 2016, the police arrived at Daniel's house. The man tried to escape but was caught by police. He was arrested and brought in for questioning. Daniel thought it had to do with child support, but detectives immediately started asking him about his involvement in Chelsea's murder at the Halloween party. He admitted he was there but quickly left. However, the guy refused to admit he had any connection to Chelsea and even claimed it was the first time he had ever seen her. The police didn't believe him, of course, because Chelsea's posters were on every corner, and Daniel couldn't have been unaware of her disappearance. At the same time, he could not explain how his DNA ended up on the clothes and body of the murdered woman. To get information, investigators began using increasingly sophisticated techniques, such as playing good cop, bad cop. Then the man's stories began to diverge. He admitted that he had overlooked it. He had been in a casual, consensual relationship with an unknown woman at the meeting. He hadn't gotten a good look at her, but he claimed she was wearing some kind of suit. The man claimed he helped Chelsea into the car with her, and shortly after their brief kiss, they parted ways. The suspect's mistake was that he thought it was about male fluids. However, the police found not her, but his skin cells on her body. Now that we know who the suspected culprit is, let's find out who Chelsea Brooke is and why her outfit turned out to be deadly for her. Chelsea Brooke was born in 1992 in Trenton, a city in Wayne County, Michigan, United States, with a population of 25,000. Her mother's name was Leanda, and her father's name was Matthew. The father was a farmer and his wife worked in a bank. In a family of 5 children, Chelsea was the youngest. She had 3 sisters, Jennifer, Megan, and Cassandra, and a brother, Nathaniel. The closest she was to Cassandra, probably because of the age difference, as the girl was only 2 years older. However, all the children were very close to each other and their parents. The Brooke family could be called the standard of an American family. They all moved and settled in a small village called Maybe in Monroe County in the U.S. state of Michigan with a population of about 600 people. In such small villages, as a rule, everyone knows each other and the crime rate is extremely low. Chelsea grew up in a friendly atmosphere, was religious, and was brought up with high moral values. The family lived on a huge farm of 65 hectares, which was founded back in 1875 by the great-grandfather of the head of the family. He continued the family business, farming for the 4th generation in a row. Chelsea attended a Christian school, devoting her free time to the study of Catholic scriptures. She then moved on to Monroe High School, which emphasized athletic training, cheerleading, and football. After receiving her education, Chelsea continued to live on a farm with her parents and Cassandra. During this period, her older sisters married and moved away. The girl loved to cook and planned to attend a culinary college to become a chef. To get the necessary skills, she got a job near her home in a restaurant called Olga's Kitchen. Here, she fulfilled the role of administrator and was very happy with her position. Chelsea grew up to be a pleasant, sociable, and beautiful girl and was always closely connected with her parents. She didn't even have a license to drive a car and wasn't particularly interested in the matter. Any transport tasks were happily handled by her parents. When she turned 22, she had already worked for 4 years and had made a circle of good friends with whom she was in constant contact. Chelsea was a very nice person who did not deserve the cruel fate that awaited her. She liked to express herself at Halloween parties. She could dye her hair pink or other bright colors, and she also had a small tattoo behind her ear in the form of an anchor. The girl loved to attend parties. One of her favorite events, in which she regularly participated, was a rock concert of local musician Mike, which he arranged on the territory of his farm. Within a few years, the ordinary Little Rock Party had grown into a well-known event, attracting about 1,000 people, even from neighboring states. The organizer had his own band and invited other local performers. On October 25, 2014, a long-awaited Halloween concert and costume party was to take place in Newport, Michigan, a half-hour drive from the Brooke farm. Chelsea was going to go with her friends Becky and Laura because she couldn't miss such a big event. She made herself a weird outfit and dressed up as Poison Ivy from the Batman universe because there was a costume contest at the event and she was going to win it. She spent a long time making this costume, selecting details, and as a basis, she took a swimming costume. The work on the outfit took many nights, but the result was worth it. The girl made a costume worthy of first place and looked very original in her outfit. On Saturday, October 25, 2014, the girlfriends gathered for a party. Laura was driving. After the event, the girls were not going to go straight home, and 22-year-old Chelsea planned to spend the night at her place. She packed up all her things and headed out to have fun. Around 10 p.m., they arrived at the concert. However, it was too early, as the event had not yet started, and preparations were still underway. Despite this, there were already hundreds of guests at the event who were expecting a large-scale party. Everything was thoroughly organized. Several vans with food and drinks, security guards watching the order on the site, and parking. It seemed to be absolutely safe. Therefore, the girls, who regularly attended this event, could not imagine that this time the whole celebration would turn out to be a nightmare. Leaving the car, the girlfriends headed to the concert venue. Chelsea had no pockets on her costume, so she was forced to leave her mobile phone in the car to avoid losing it. Over 1,000 people gathered at the event, and almost everyone was in different stage looks and costumes. Alcohol was pouring down by the river, of course. Of course, such concerts do not do without illegal substances, so many were tipsy. Most of the people were unknown to the girls because they came from different cities, but there were a few acquaintances: Penny, her sister Heather, and Becky. They all knew each other well and had been socializing for years, even though Penny was 10 years older than Chelsea and already had children of her own. Here, they all felt the energy of the event and enjoyed the festivities. Finally, the rock concert began, and everyone was enthralled by the loud music. About an hour after the concert started, the girls headed to a big bonfire that was lit away from the concert camp. It was about 12:50 at night. Halfway there, Chelsea suddenly shrieked and cried. She was holding her face, which had a large gash on it. Out of the darkness, someone had attacked her, and the girl had received a sudden blow to the forehead and bridge of her nose from a drunken camper. Penny began to calm her friend down and persuade her to stay and not go home alone. She couldn't drive Chelsea home since she didn't have her own car and depended on her sister, who didn't seem to have any intention of leaving the event. Chelsea's friends continued to party even though Chelsea was traumatized and withdrew to the bathroom. After a while, Chelsea's friends began to disperse without waiting for her. Becky went home alone. She had Chelsea's things with her that she was going to give to her the next day. Penny and Heather left too, since Penny had to get up early and get ready for work. They never found Chelsea. Penny couldn't call her since Chelsea's cell phone was left in the car. She knew Laura would give her a ride, and with peace of mind, she headed home with her friends. But what she didn't know was that Chelsea and Laura weren't together at that moment either. They were lost in the crowd at the party, since there were so many people and everyone was acting fussy. Laura tried to find her friend, but to no avail. Becky and Laura weren't particularly worried about her, as there were a lot of people they knew there. The girls thought that Chelsea was spending time with one of her own and would be driven home. The situation was complicated by the fact that all the girls were drunk and disoriented by the noise and chaos of the party, so they couldn't supervise their friend. Becky woke up early in the morning. She knew that none of her friends had made plans for that Sunday. They all knew they might be hungover and were going to sleep it off. The girl dialed Chelsea's mother's number to tell her that she had her friend's belongings left. However, there was no way to get through on the phone. She continued to go about her business, and it was only towards evening that Chelsea's sister, Cassandra, texted her. She informed her that Chelsea still hadn't returned home. Becky replied that Chelsea had planned to spend the night at Laura's. Everyone calmed down, thinking that Chelsea was at her place, but Chelsea didn't come home by Monday, which looked suspicious. The family contacted Laura, but she hadn't heard from Chelsea since the party. They started calling everyone they knew from the event, and it turned out that Chelsea hadn't spent the night at any of her friends' houses, and no one had seen her since the night they lost each other at the party. Chelsea had not been in touch with any of her friends and acquaintances, nor had she appeared on social media. Therefore, the missing person's loved ones found themselves in a panic. They contacted the Monroe County Police Department and reported the young woman missing. A report was taken from the missing person's family. At first, the police were reluctant to take the case because it was all about the party, alcohol, and an adult 22-year-old girl who, by law, could do anything, including leaving without informing her loved ones. But relatives insisted on looking for Chelsea. Her mother was sure something bad had happened to her. Detectives began to investigate the circumstances of the disappearance of the young girl. They set up a search circle in the area between Newport and her farmhouse. While the search for the missing girl was underway, the detectives sought the help of Mike, a rock singer and party organizer, and called him in for questioning. The guy came to the police station to give a statement. However, he was not intimately acquainted with Chelsea and claimed he had no idea where she was. Mike did not arouse any suspicion, so they let him go home. Detectives met with security guards who were working the event. They claimed that they had not noticed anything suspicious. However, the girl's relatives thought that Mike knew more than he was saying, so they came straight to his house, trying to find out any information about their daughter. They unceremoniously invaded his territory, as this is where the party was held, and began to conduct their own searches. The situation at that point became extremely heated. Mike agreed to allow law enforcement officers onto his property. He did not refuse anyone, as he did not want to be considered involved in the disappearance of the girl. But on the territory, the police found nothing of interest to the investigation. Despite an organized search operation, nothing could be found. On Monday, the next day, detectives continued to contact people who had been at the Halloween party. Of course, it was difficult to get any information. It was a costume party where everyone wore masks and costumes and drank. At the same time, these were young people who didn't mind making themselves known. As a result of communication with the guests of the party, detectives received hundreds of contradictory facts, many of which they could not even check. This took a lot of time. Most of the data provided turned out to be false. Most likely, young people were simply confused and gave incorrect information, but there were also people who were deliberately trying to draw attention to themselves. Among the testimonies provided were even frankly absurd ones. According to one of the holidaymakers at the party, the girl could have been kidnapped into slavery. Another person said that a satanic ritual was held there and she could have been burned alive. Either way, the case went viral. Information about it, rumors and lies spread among the locals at the speed of wildfire. The news was littered with the most gruesome headlines, including suggestions of victims of satanic rituals. All of this hurt the family of the missing woman, as well as Mike, who for some time had been considered the prime suspect because of his fame. Despite the seeming absurdity, the police were forced to test all the theories voiced by the guests. They found out that there was indeed a bonfire to the side of the stage which reached a height of 2 meters. The ashes from it were sifted, and it turned out that there were no human remains in it. Therefore, the theory of ritual sacrifice was ruled out. Mike's farm was thoroughly searched on quad bikes and with dogs, which took several days. Many volunteers were involved, but nothing suspicious was found. The missing woman's friends felt guilty about what had happened. After all, they were the ones who left her alone that night and didn't look for her. They all actively monitored the missing woman's social media pages, trying to find any clues as to where Chelsea might be. Chelsea did not have a steady boyfriend, so police officers found and questioned all the young men with whom the missing woman had been in some way connected in recent years. Their cars were searched, and DNA samples of the boyfriends were collected. During this period, rock singer Mike allowed a real command center for the search operation to be set up on his farm and assisted the police in every way possible. He even provided a generator so that the search team would have uninterrupted access to electricity. Volunteers and those who cared about Chelsea's fate, including her family and friends, also set up a tent camp here. The search for the girl was going on almost around the clock, but there was no progress. Despite the warm welcome and comprehensive assistance to the investigation, which Mike provided, he still aroused suspicion among the detectives. First of all, because of the fact that the guy was very reluctant to communicate with them and seemed to be hiding something. But even that was understandable, considering how unceremoniously they had invaded his territory. Eventually, all the guy's possessions were searched, but nothing against Mike was found. The very arrival of the police was a very unpleasant episode, as they rounded him up and threw him to the ground, even threatening to shoot his dog, which was trying to protect its owner. But there was a reason for that too. For when the police arrived, they found Mike covered in blood. It was later determined that he had soiled himself while rescuing his dog, which he had carried from the woods in his arms after it had been caught in a trap and badly injured. In the end, Mike had only himself to blame for throwing the party and not properly ensuring the safety of those gathered at the event. However, for this, he felt attacked by the missing woman's family, neighbors, and police officers. People came to his fields completely without permission. One woman went there with her dog at around 3 a.m. and searched the entire yard around the house to find Chelsea there, but all to no avail. There were a lot of people here. Helicopters were flying, drones were peering into the guy's windows literally day and night. All of this was causing serious stress, especially against a background of police suspicion and media activity. In the course of the investigation, detectives came upon Gavin Hewitt, who gave investigators new information. According to him, the girl in the poison ivy costume was also looking for her friends at the event after she went missing from sight. She asked party guests about Laura, but no one wanted to help. She burst into tears. Then one of the guys in the crowd, named Gavin, took pity on her and offered his mobile phone around 1 a.m., but she could only get through to Penny. Chelsea asked her to pick her up from the party, but she replied that she was already home and had gone to bed. She was drunk, so she couldn't come get her friend. According to Gavin, Chelsea was very upset that she lost her friends and was left all alone. However, the girl refused his offer to give her a ride. According to other witnesses from the party, Chelsea made it to the car park. She felt helpless as all her belongings were left in the car, including her phone. She couldn't get to them, couldn't call anyone, and couldn't find her friends. Some acquaintances saw her there, but unfortunately, no one ever helped the girl. Eventually, around 2:45 a.m., Chelsea walked out onto a gravel road that ran from the car park. She tried to find someone she knew who could give her a lift home. Several people offered to help her get home, but she declined the stranger's help and headed alone on foot towards home. There, the girl was last seen alive. Many mobile phone camera recordings were made at the party. The police collected all possible materials from the party participants. Now they had to analyze thousands of photos and videos. Some witnesses talked about a guy who was selling t-shirts that night. The cops were looking for him not as a suspect, but as a witness who might have spotted Chelsea. When the officers found the t-shirt vendor, he admitted that he had indeed seen the girl in the poison ivy costume. She looked so bright that it was hard to miss her. The witness was also able to give police officers some clues. According to him, the girl was approached by some suspicious-looking guy wearing a hoodie and a sweatshirt. They chatted, and then the girl left with him around 3 a.m. They just chatted and looked like regular mates, no hugging or flirting. It turns out this stranger was caught on several cameras that filmed what was going on. Based on these recordings, as well as the testimony of the t-shirt seller, with the help of a forensic artist, a portrait of the man who may have been the last person to see Chelsea Brooke alive was drawn up. This portrait was shown to the media, and at the same time, a reward was announced for any information that would solve the case. Gradually, the reward fund grew from $5,000 to $30,000. Flyers were actively distributed. The whole of Monroe County was filled with photos of the missing person. At that time, about 200,000 leaflets had already been distributed. Literally, all settlements were covered with posters with her photo, and leaflets were distributed by couriers with pizza. The police station started receiving calls with information from local residents. Many leads were received. Data was processed, and about 1,000 interrogations were conducted, but it never led to anything. After almost half a year, the case took an unexpected turn on New Year's Eve, 2015. The police received a call from a woman named Carrie Carr. She stated that her boyfriend told her that he killed Chelsea. The woman was dating her boyfriend as suddenly in anger, he said he killed a girl in a poison ivy costume with the same knife he threatened her with. Carrie revealed that she ran away from her boyfriend because he was going to stalk her and the baby. She was aware of the high-profile case involving Chelsea's disappearance and so wanted to help with the investigation. The police were skeptical about this information because the woman had a clear motive to provoke the arrest of the boyfriend. She could simply take revenge on him in this way. Such cases had already been in the practice of investigators, but they could not ignore it, so they undertook to verify the information. As the details were established, it turned out that this was another false claim. It turned out that the caller, Carrie, was one of 2 people arrested by the police for perjury. She really did go to such desperate measures to get back at her ex. The second detainee was Harlan Burt, a 19-year-old who claimed to have intervened in the conflict. According to him, Chelsea was being harassed by 2 guys, and he tried to fight them off, but they dragged the girl into the fields. However, he later admitted that the whole thing was a fabrication. Although this information did not help in any way to advance the case, the police soon received a new call. On the 22nd of March, 2015, Cheryl Redley was cleaning her patio of her home after the winter. She found a red leather shoe that she simply tossed into a rubbish bag without thinking. Her spouse came in the evening and saw the shoe in the bag. He asked his wife about it, and she admitted that she had found it while cleaning up the yard. He then speculated that the find might be related to the disappearance of Chelsea, who was just wearing red shoes. The house was about a mile from where the party was. Police officers had repeatedly scoured the area, but the couple could not believe that the searchers could have missed a conspicuous red shoe. Puzzled by these questions, the woman called the police and reported the find. Officers who arrived on the scene inspected the area and the shoe. They took the shoe and confirmed that it was very similar to the shoes of the missing Chelsea. However, nothing else could be found here. It turned out that indeed this area had not been inspected before. The searchers did not have time to do it before the onset of winter, and then the snow hid all possible clues. A new discovery was made soon after. Eric K-Sapp was collecting scrap metal with friends at an abandoned industrial plant 15 miles from the party site. While crossing the railway tracks, he accidentally knocked over rotting plywood. He thought there was some strange plant underneath. When he touched it, he realized it was a carnival costume. Next to it lay a red wig, just like the one Chelsea had worn the night she disappeared. However, the man did not immediately go to the police. He was aware of the girl's disappearance, but did not pay attention to her clothes. A week later, Eric saw another report on TV about the search for the missing woman in this costume, and realized that his find was much more important than he had originally thought. Perhaps it really was connected to the girl's disappearance. However, he did not immediately report it to the police, even afterward, as he was afraid that his DNA could have been left on the outfit when he examined it. The man was afraid of police charges, but his conscience plagued him. He confessed to his sister that he had found the costume, and she made him report the find to the police. A week later, Eric reported the find to the sheriff's department. The police arrived at the specified location and found Chelsea's carnival costume and wig. Naturally, Eric became the prime suspect. The man provided the cops with all the information they needed, including his DNA samples. He was adamant that he never knew Chelsea. Investigators pressed him to the end, but he denied everything. Eric agreed to take a polygraph test and successfully passed. By then, forensics had already examined the missing woman's outfit. They noticed that the straps had been torn off as if it had been taken off the girl by force, and the leggings were torn. However, they had to wait for the results of the forensic examination. On the poison ivy suit, brown stains that looked like blood were found. Forensics confirmed that it was blood, and it belonged to the missing Chelsea. After that, everyone was even more desperate to find the girl alive. By then, over 1 million flyers had been distributed, but there was still no significant progress in the case. Then, the police realized that Chelsea's costume had been found near the trailer of Harlan's grandmother, who had earlier testified that he had tried to wrestle Chelsea away from strangers, but they had dragged her into the woods. He later admitted that the story was a fabrication. Police believed the coincidences were not coincidental and invited him in for questioning. Harlan claimed he was not involved in the girl's disappearance, but could not explain why his name had already come up twice in the case. He was asked to take a polygraph test, and he agreed. Harlan passed it successfully and submitted his DNA samples. His material wasn't found on the missing woman's clothes or shoes. Therefore, all suspicions against him were lifted. On the 24th of April 2015, John Marin, who was preparing his 5-hectare plot of land covered with dense forest for construction, discovered something. The site was not far from the abandoned building where Chelsea's clothes were found, and about 10 miles from the rock concert venue. Construction workers were working on the site when a bulldozer got stuck in the mud in a tight spot. When the driver got out to look, he saw what looked like a human skeleton. He called out to the other workers, who took a closer look and were convinced that it was a human body. The body was badly decomposed, and there was no face. Construction work was halted, and the terrified workers called the police. A man informed the dispatcher that he had found human remains. John suspected it was the body of the missing Chelsea, who everyone was actively searching for. One of the scraps from her costume was found nearby. Her hair was blonde. All of this reinforced his suspicions. Police arrived at the spot and found the body, which was dumped in the open and covered with branches and leaves. The remains were sent for forensic examination. The body was identified thanks to dental records. It was indeed the missing Chelsea Brooke. The medical examiner determined that Chelsea died a horrible and agonizing death. The murder was very brutal. The girl's jaw was so mutilated that it literally split in two. The facial bones in the area of the eyes and nose were shattered, and several teeth were knocked out. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Evidence was found that she had been raped before her death. The perpetrator's DNA was found on the body and uploaded to the police database, but no match was found. Due to the poor condition of the body, no further information could be obtained, and the investigation was stalled for some time. More than a year later, an important clue emerged in 2016. DNA matching the DNA found at the crime scene suddenly appeared in the police database. It was Daniel Clay, a 27-year-old man who grew up in Monroe County. He got into the database because of child support problems. The guy had a rough childhood. His mother went to prison right after giving birth, so he was raised by foster parents. When Daniel was 17 years old, his foster father died, and the teenager was placed in an orphanage. There, he became addicted to illegal substances. Afterward, he had no steady job. One of his old girlfriends got pregnant, but he refused to have the child and didn't pay child support. He had a turbulent criminal record, including intimate harassment and dealing in illegal substances. But for some reason, his DNA samples had not previously been taken for the police database. On the 22nd of July, 2016, Daniel was arrested again and brought in for questioning. He admitted he was at that party, but quickly left. However, the guy refused to admit he had anything to do with Chelsea and even claimed he was seeing her for the first time. At the same time, He could not explain how his DNA ended up on the clothes and body of the murdered woman. Under pressure from the police, he admitted that he had forgotten that he had a consensual, casual intimacy with some unknown girl at the party. According to him, she was wearing some kind of costume, and he didn't get a good look at her. According to the guy, he got into a car with her, and a short time after the intimacy, they broke up. The suspect's mistake was that he thought it was about male fluids. However, the police found not fluids on Chelsea's body and on the straps of her poison ivy costume, but his skin cells. They also found traces of him on her torn leggings, which were ripped along the seam between her legs. It didn't look like a consensual act, and the police didn't tell him that the victim had intimate contact with someone. Only a narrow circle of investigators knew about this, so when Daniel said that he had had sexual intercourse, he admitted it himself. Since then, the suspect has repeatedly changed his testimony, including a complete denial that he knew Chelsea and that he did not have intercourse with anyone that night. Once again, during questioning, the perpetrator's story changed. This time, Daniel said that he did have intercourse that night with a girl he met leaving the car park. She herself got into his car and started flirting with him. Daniel became more assertive. She accepted his advances, but then became aggressive. In a fit of passion, she demanded that he bite her, hit her, and strangle her during lovemaking. He had to comply. The boyfriend bit and choked her for several seconds at a time. The suspect reported that when the sexual intercourse was over, he realized that the girl was not showing signs of life. He tried to resuscitate her, to bring her to her senses, but nothing worked. She had no pulse. In a state of shock and panic, Daniel didn't know what to do. He just drove around the forest roads for about half an hour, trying to gather his thoughts, then dumped the body in the woods near an abandoned industrial building. He was never able to explain why Chelsea's clothes were found so far away from the body. Overall, his story seemed absurd and implausible, so investigators did not believe in its veracity. This ball of lies from the main suspect grew endlessly. As a result, the police lost patience and charged Daniel Clay with the murder of Chelsea Brooke. Daniel pleaded not guilty. He claimed that the girl died as a result of an accident during passion. In May 2017, the trial of Daniel Clay began. He tried to prove to everyone present in court that he strangled the girl too much during sexual intercourse and she died accidentally. However, the medical examiner refuted his story, affirming that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, which meant that Daniel's whole story was a lie. Daniel's girlfriend testified at the trial, saying that she had never noticed him being violent and could not believe that he was capable of such a thing. But at the next court hearing, Daniel's girlfriend was shocked and testified. She said that he confessed to her of the crime when she visited him in prison. The police put forward their version that the accused saw Chelsea walking down the road alone and was defenseless that night. He tricked her into getting into the car, then raped and brutally beat her to death. Daniel could not explain why the girl's costume and wig were found in one place, one shoe in another, and her body in a third place. This story left so many gaps that were unexplained, but the important thing was that the girl's body was found and the perpetrator was caught. To refute false testimony, a special dummy was even used, which the defendant strangled for a few seconds right in front of the jury. It was proven that his words were untrue because it was necessary to squeeze the neck for about 3 minutes to strangle someone. The prosecutor personally demonstrated how long it takes to squeeze the neck to kill a person, and it made a strong impression on the jury. Also, the prosecutor further emphasized the mutilation that the perpetrator inflicted on the victim. There were multiple fractures to the face and jaw. The perpetrator acted with extreme brutality in inflicting these injuries on the victim. It became clear that such a crime could not have been random. As a result, the court found Daniel Clay guilty of rape, brutal murder, and bodily harm. The court sentenced Daniel Clay to life in prison without parole. The court also sentenced him to another 75 years in prison on other charges of violence against women. Sometime later, Chelsea's mother gave him a Bible, which Daniel Clay promised to keep. Incredibly, Chelsea's mother admitted in a media interview that she forgave her daughter's killer. Perhaps it was said out of emotion,